The cold had a way of crawling under skin and into memory, the kind that made even streetlights look lonely, and on that winter evening outside a closed diner in a small Midwestern town, Sarah felt it settle into her bones as she shifted her weight and tightened her grip around the small body asleep against her chest. Snow fell without urgency, as if the world had all the time she did not, and for a moment she wondered how a life could narrow so quietly into one duffel bag, one borrowed coat, and one child who trusted her completely. If this were you, standing there with nowhere left to turn, would you still believe tomorrow could be different, or would you finally let hope freeze over? Sarah had not always been here. Once, there had been a warm apartment with yellow curtains and the smell of coffee in the mornings. Once, there had been laughter that felt permanent. But permanence is a fragile promise. Her husband's sudden death on a rain-soaked highway in Pennsylvania had cracked her world open, and the months after blurred into hospital bills, unpaid rent, and polite condolences that slowly stopped coming. She tried to be strong in ways people admire from a distance, working 2 jobs, smiling for her son Joshua, telling herself that exhaustion was temporary. But when the second job disappeared and the landlord stopped answering her calls, strength turned into survival, and survival into fear. She ended up in that town almost by accident, following a bus route as far as the last few dollars would take her. The diner had been open the night before, warm and bright, and she had sat in a booth with Joshua sharing fries, pretending it was an adventure. Tonight the lights were off, the windows dark, and the sign buzzed faintly like a tired insect. She pressed her forehead briefly against the glass, feeling foolish for hoping it might open again just for her. Behind her, traffic passed without noticing, every car carrying someone else's story forward. What would you do if your child stirred in your arms and asked, not with words but with a soft breath and a small hand tightening on your sweater, whether you were safe? Sarah swallowed the ache rising in her throat. She told herself that being a mother meant finding answers even when there were none, and yet all she could see was a night stretching endlessly ahead. She considered shelters she had heard about, churches that might have doors unlocked, and the long, dark walk between them. Each option felt heavier than the snow. That was when she noticed the man standing a few steps away, awkwardly holding his coat open as if he had been about to leave and changed his mind. His name, she would later learn, was Michael, and he looked like someone who had his life mostly together, which somehow made the moment more unsettling. He had kind eyes, though, the kind that didn't rush or judge, and he kept his distance as if he understood how easily trust breaks when you need it most. Sarah's first instinct was to turn away, to protect what little dignity she felt she had left, but exhaustion pinned her in place. Michael had come out for a late meal after finishing a shift at the nearby hospital, his mind still full of charts and quiet losses that never made the news. He saw Sarah before she saw him, the way she stood as if bracing against more than the cold, the way she rocked slightly even while Joshua slept. Something in that posture felt familiar, like a memory he had spent years trying not to think about. His own childhood had held nights like this, though he rarely spoke of them now. He hesitated, knowing how often help can feel like another threat, but also knowing what it meant to walk past. When their eyes met, the world seemed to narrow again, this time into a shared understanding that didn't need explanation. Sarah didn't ask for anything, and Michael didn't offer anything loudly. Instead, there was a quiet exchange of reality, of two people recognizing a line that should not be crossed alone. He listened as she spoke haltingly, not rehearsed or dramatic, just honest in the way only the desperate can be. She told him about Joshua, about the bus, about the night. She admitted, almost in a whisper, that she had nowhere left to go. Michael felt the weight of that sentence land in his chest, because he remembered hearing something similar years ago from his own mother, whispered in a car with no gas and no plan. Back then, a stranger's kindness had shifted the course of his life, not by fixing everything but by opening one door. He knew he couldn't fix Sarah's world in a night, but he also knew that no one should have to carry that fear alone. He thought of his spare room, the one he kept empty because it was easier than filling it with reminders of how alone he sometimes felt. The decision was not heroic or dramatic. It was practical, almost ordinary, and maybe that was what made it powerful. Michael offered warmth, safety, and time, not as charity but as something shared between people who understood how thin the line can be. Sarah hesitated, every warning bell ringing, every lesson about trust screaming in her mind, but then Joshua shifted inside, and the sound cut through her fear. Sometimes the bravest thing is accepting help, even when pride begs you not to. That night changed all of them, though none of them knew it yet. Sarah slept in a bed for the first time in weeks, the room unfamiliar but blessedly quiet. Joshua woke to sunlight instead of cold, and laughed at the way snow piled against the window. Michael made pancakes that burned slightly at the edges and apologized too much, unsure of how to exist in this sudden closeness. There were no promises made, no declarations of salvation, just the steady, awkward rhythm of people learning to breathe again. The weeks that followed were not easy. Sarah wrestled with guilt and gratitude in equal measure, determined not to overstay or become a burden. She found work at a nearby grocery store, then better work at a small accounting office that needed help. Michael drove Joshua to preschool in the mornings when Sarah's shifts overlapped, discovering that healing often arrives disguised as responsibility. Slowly, trust grew where fear had lived, and the house filled with small sounds of life returning. If you were watching this from the outside, you might think the story is about rescue, about one man stepping in at the right moment. But the truth is quieter and more complicated. It is about what happens when pain is met with compassion instead of indifference, when people choose not to look away. Sarah did not forget the night outside the diner, and Michael did not forget what it felt like to be needed in a way that mattered. Both of them learned that second chances are rarely loud, and almost never convenient. Years later, when Joshua would ask about the scar in his mother's voice whenever winter came, she would tell him about a night when hope felt impossibly small and still survived. She would tell him that kindness does not always come from those who owe you something, but often from those who remember what it is like to be lost. And maybe, if you let yourself sit with that truth for a moment, you might ask what door you could open, or what step you might take, if someone crossed your path needing what you have. Before the story ends, take a moment to tell us in the comments what part of this journey stayed with you the most. The night Sarah thought would break her became the night her life bent towards something gentler, and long after the snow melted, the memory remained as proof that even in the coldest moments, one choice, one open door, can change everything. If this story truly touched your heart, consider liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, so more stories of hope and second chances can find those who need them most.